welcome to Conscious Pathways, the podcast where we explore the intersection of education and social justice through transformative conversations. I am your host, Brittany, and I am so glad that you are joining for yet another episode of Conscious Pathways. I am joined by a fantastic guest today, Clarice L. Jackson. Clarice stands as a beacon of visionary leadership, an ordained minister, and an unwavering advocate for the educational fairness. Her remarkable journey began in 2000 when she faced educational challenges with her daughter, Latecia. Witnessing firsthand the struggles her daughter endured, Clarice embarked on a transformative mission to revolutionize literacy support and advocacy. For over 36 years, Clarice has been at the forefront of advocating for literacy and education. Guided by Dr. King's timeless words, Clarice embodies a commitment to inclusivity and excellence in education. She strives to ensure every child has an opportunity to thrive academically and beyond. In Omaha, Nebraska, Clarice is a proud mother of two exceptional children, Makai and Latecia, whose journey with dyslexia ignited Clarice's passion for advocacy, shaping her transformative work in literacy and education. I adore every bit of this conversation with Clarice. She just brought so much joy and care and passion into the work that she does, so much love. She just is such an incredible human being to really just talk to. We talked a lot about her journey in education and, initially meeting her daughter Latecia at the age of 8 and how, as, someone working with her in education and how she kind of became her legal mother after that. Was such a beautiful story, and it opened so many doors into just understanding literacy, understanding dyslexia, and really being a true advocate for change. I'm so excited to share this interview with Clarice, so let's hop into it. Hello and hello. Welcome to Conscious Pathways. I am joined by Clarice Jackson. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. I've been seeing a lot of the things you've been posting. You just finished a big major conference. How did that go?
Oh, it was amazing. It exceeded my expectations, and it has just further affirmed that the message that I'm trying to relay and the people who genuinely care and who can fix it, which would be us by us with allies, of course, um, is the right path. So I'm excited.
Yes. It was the kind of Black literacy conference, and you had so many amazing voices and so many amazing keynote speakers, and just people I haven't even heard of. So I'm excited. I know you have dates for the next conference, so I'm really looking forward to that
Well,
one.
awesome. We can't wait to see you in person and have you there.
Yes, I'm so
Possibly
excited.
the podcast as well. Who
Hey,
knows?
let's go. Podcast on the move.
Exactly.
Have you nailed down where it's going to be yet?
So the thought process is I'm born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, and
Mm-hmm.
so Nebraska is smack dab in the middle of the United States. And for me, who gets to travel from west to east coast a
Mm-hmm.
lot and in between, it's standard practice to be at conferences on both coasts,
Mm-hmm.
but nothing really in the Midwest. So
That's
that's why it was
true.
important to me to bring it to the Midwest, so that my particular state gets the benefit of access. One of the things that we
Yes.
talk about within Black Literacy Matters, the access to knowledge, the access to best practices, the access to services. And
Yes.
so that is the mindset behind Nebraska. So since the inaugural conference, I've gotten lots of invitations to be here, there, and everywhere. And
Yes.
although very intriguing and very tempting, I'm going to stay in Nebraska at least one more year. I want to give
Yes.
our public school systems, our community organizations, an opportunity to get access to these invaluable keynotes,
Mm-hmm.
the trainings, and all of that. So, the second annual Black Literacy Matters Conference will be in Omaha, Nebraska,
Yay.
and it's going to be March 19th through the 21st, which is a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 2025. And then we're going
Mm-hmm.
to have a pre conference for those of you who want a little bit more, a little extra.
Yes, yes,
And if you
yes.
want to spend the whole week in Nebraska, it'll be the 17th through the 21st.
That is so
And then
exciting.
after that, we'll probably start a traveling. It'll change each state
Yes.
with strategy. And I'll keep that to
Strategy.
myself for right now, but
Makes
it will
sense.
not be your typical traveling conference. It
Mm-hmm.
has a goal and an agenda.
Yes.
So
That is
you got it
so.
here first.
Ooh, look at me getting the scoop.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that though. I love that you're kind of bringing it back to your roots and really wanting to bring it back to your home state of Nebraska. I've actually never been to Nebraska. I've been to a lot of states, but I haven't been to Nebraska yet. So I'm excited to
I hear
potentially
that a
go there and
lot.
see
Yeah,
it. But I love that. It's
absolutely.
I just went to a conference in Pasadena, California, where I went to school, and there were people from all over the state going to this conference, and it was such an amazing experience, like meeting people from Northern California and people from where I come from, and people from I'm from San Bernardino, California, and so seeing there were like people from San Bernardino there, and so that I know for me that felt really great and affirming of like, wow, this is great, like I'm just really connecting with people in my state, people in my community, people in my field. And so I could only imagine how that feels for people in Nebraska. Like you said, there's a lot of conferences, especially when we talk about education, and they do tend to kind of center on the east and west coast. Sometimes we'll see it in the south. I've seen some in Tennessee before, some in
Hmm.
Atlanta before, but they really do tend to center on like the coast. So our like kind of Midwest states, it's either you travel to the conferences or you don't get this information. So I love that you're really focusing on giving back to especially the community that you come from, the community that you're raised in. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm a woman. I'm a strong woman of faith, and one of the things that the Bible speaks about is making sure you take care of your house first. You can't help
Mm,
anybody else's house unless your house is in order, or it
mm,
doesn't make sense to do that. So that's
yes.
kind of my mindset with Nebraska.
I love it. I love it. Like I said, I'm excited. I'm excited to potentially go there and see it and see what Nebraska's got to offer. All those beautiful things. But
Did you know it's the birth site of Malcolm X?
really, I didn't know that.
Know that? So we have the Malcolm X Foundation. So come see the
Wow.
birth site of Malcolm X. It's also where our boxing champion Terrence Crawford,
Huh.
he lives there as well. Warren Buffett is there.
Okay.
Gabrielle Union was born here. So yeah,
Wow. Okay,
a few
Nebraska.
celebrities on our map. Yeah,
Okay, Nebraska's out here. I see you.
yeah.
Well, I'm
Little
excited.
history, little history.
Little history. I
Yeah.
like it. I like it. I always feel like be proud of where you come from. Like I said, I'm from San Bernardino, and uh, there's not a lot going on there, but we do have a lot of good things coming out of it too. We had the first McDonald's, so look at us go.
Hey, amen. And it's got you coming out of there. So hey,
There you
you're gonna
go.
put it.
There you go. There's
You'll
a
put it on.
exactly, exactly. So I always, I'm very proud of where I come from, and San Bernardino. Just shout out all my little Inland Empire folks. You know what I mean. Um, but I want to know a little bit more about how you got into education. So, who or what inspired you within education, and especially advocating in education as well?
All right. Well, like I said, I'm a woman of faith. This is not a church podcast. However, I cannot share my story without mentioning
Mm,
why and who. I feel like it was a God given purpose, first and
mm,
foremost. I feel like God innately put it in within me. And then he was so gracious and so purposeful that he allowed my father to be a school teacher. And so I grew up in a household with an educator. My dad was a black male educator, which we know, or we should
mm,
know, that black male educators or black educators in general significantly change the abysmal trajectories of our children in schools when we have contact with them. So I grew up in a household with a father who was
mm.
a middle school teacher. His sister, my aunt, both of them were educators. So I had that all
Wow.
around me. And then what ended up happening is I became the mother of a young lady named Latecia Fox, who is my daughter.
Mm,
And I say became because on my journey of working in a school system, I met my daughter
mm,
when she was 8. And long story short, I became her mother legally
mm,
at the age of 9, and I raised her, and she had dyslexia. And she
mm,
had made it to the 4th grade, unable to read simple 2, 3 letter words. And so that changed my entire life and
mm,
shifted me from not just an education focus to a more specific focus, and that was literacy and or dyslexia.
mhm,
And so from that path, I branched out into who you have today, which is a long story, but
mhm,
that's how I got to you today, Brittany. My upbringing, my parents, first
mhm.
and foremost, God, and then my daughter.
Wow. as an educator, like I love that you stepped into this young lady's life and was really advocating for her and with her, and you really saw all this beautiful value and beauty that she brought into the world. And I know, like, I've had students that have come into my life that you just have a really special connection with, and
Yes,
it's, there's no explaining it. It just is. You're like, we are bonded.
we are
And
bonded.
yes, yes. And so it's just like it happens. I feel like there's always students in my class that I connect really deeply with, but every now and then there's that one that you just really bond with, and you're like, yep, okay,
Yeah,
we're gonna be with
I'm
each
gonna
other for
be
a
in
long
that.
time.
We're gonna be in each other's life for life. Yeah,
Yes,
and
yes.
she was that, and
Mm,
she lived with her grandmother. Her mom at the time was incarcerated,
mm,
and when her mother got out, and our relationship had blossomed for about a year or so,
yeah.
and she had already started calling me mom. Her mom was not intimidated by that,
Mm,
and her mom understood that she had struggles, and there were certain things that she couldn't do for her daughter. And she
mm,
looked at me and she said, "You can." And
mm.
so I want you to take her. I want you to have her because I know you can provide for her what I can't. And that I feel
Wow,
is the greatest love of all is
that is.
to love your child and to want better for them, even if you aren't in the position to do it.
Yes.
So I honor her biological mother for that.
Yeah, and that's a definitely a big strength, is to be able to recognize that and know that, like you said, there's that deep love where you're like, I know that you deserve more than what I can offer, and here's this other person who I know can do that. And so that takes a lot of strength, that takes a lot of inner work, and a lot of you know, just beauty to be able to say, you know what, here you go. I want the best for her. You want the best for her. Like, let's all collaborate together and make sure that we're doing what makes sense for this extraordinarily young human. And so I love that you were there and you were connected and bonded. So that's such a beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing that.
And you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
She is a gift from God.
Oh, I love that.
She
um,
definitely was part of a plan. It's quite apparent and quite clear. So I don't know
mm,
what it would have been like if I hadn't said yes or hadn't developed
yeah.
that relationship with her. But I can't see my life without her. She
Wow.
just fits.
She
She's my
just
child.
fits. Ah, I love
Hmm.
it. I love it. I love it. There's so much beauty in that. And like you said, yeah, I mean, you were,
Yes.
just having a young child plopped in your lap when you weren't expecting to parent all of a sudden, that's a big deal.
No,
That's a big commitment. That's a big thing to say yes to. So,
it is. I was very young. I was about 20 years old at the
oh
time, and
wow.
I had no children. I wasn't married. I only made $800 a month. But I
Whew.
had loving parents, both my
Mm-hmm.
parents. I spoke with them because you need a support system. It
Yes.
takes a village to raise children.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot you can do as a parent, but you
Mm-hmm.
need a support system. And so
Yeah.
mine, of course, and she was never, and I'll make this very clear, she was never treated as if she were a stepchild, a foster child. She was never in foster care. It was just direct. Her and our mom had our conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We went and legally did it through the court system, and she
Wow.
became my daughter. And so I'd never call her any of those
Mm-hmm.
things that differentiate her from my son, who I
Yeah.
biologically had. They are both my children,
Mm-hmm.
and I would give the world for both of them. I love them dearly.
I love that. That reminds me of my grandma so much. She did very similar things. And, me and my siblings, we all know that we are all loved and we are siblings and, and that
Yeah,
there's no step, there's no half, there's no, like, no one is treated any differently. We are all her
no,
grandchildren. And we are all loved
yeah,
equally and all the same. And that's, as I've gotten older, when you grow up with that, you're like, yeah, this is how, people are. This is how people should be, right?
hmm,
And then you kind
yeah,
of start
yeah,
seeing the reality in the world, and you're like, oh, okay, this is not how everyone experiences, family and love and connection. And, I think that was one of the driving forces of me getting into education as well, is that I want other children to feel this, and I want other children to know that they are valued, that they are important, that they have an extraordinary light that they have, and just to be loved and to be cared for. And so having more of this in education is important.
I agree. I agree.
Yes,
I
yes,
agree.
yes.
And those grandparents, those grandmas, they're so,
Grandmas.
so, so important. And my grandmother played an instrumental role in my life, and the
Mm,
drive and the independence and the surety that I
mm.
possess. It all comes from my grandmother. So a grandmother's love is immeasurable,
It's
and I
immeasurable.
miss mine dearly. Yeah.
Yes, I'm grateful. My grandmother is still here, and so I'm so grateful for, like, the times I get to spend with her, and it
Try to
feels
soak it
so.
all in.
Yes, I'm trying to soak
Yeah.
in
Soak
all
it
the
all.
day. No, I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Soak
call her
in
after
all
this
that
podcast.
love. Yeah. All that wisdom, and tell her how
Yes,
much she means to you. Because when they're
yes.
gone, you're just like, what is life?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go from here? And then everything that she shared with you from birth until the day God takes her home, it all starts coming back,
Mm,
and it comes through and channels through to you at different times and different situations, but it'll all show back up. It's so
yes,
precious.
it's so
It's
precious.
precious.
You are so right.
I'm trying not to get emotional about that, but it is very precious,
It
and
is. I
I value it and I honor her. Her name was Stella Bennett, and
Stella
Stella
Bennett.
Victoria, and she used
Ooh.
to do something very significant. She would go, "Woo, hello." That was her thing to do. So I had to do that one
Yes.
time for her.
Yes, that
She's a,
feels like such a grandma thing, and I love it.
she was from Alabama, so that finger snap,
Hmm.
she did it all the time.
Yes, yes. That's bringing me back to just family and just I love it.
Yes, yes,
I love
yes. It's
everything
so
about
important.
this. So prior to meeting your daughter and working with her and advocating around dyslexia, had you worked with children with dyslexia before? Did you know a lot about it before, or was this kind of your first introduction into dyslexia?
I had always had a passion for teaching. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
God given, and then my father. So I grew up in a neighborhood where we had a lot of children. Grew up in low income housing, and so children were all around. And so I used to just bring all the kids to my front step, my front porch, sit them all down on the concrete, and teach. And I played the
Mm-hmm.
teacher, and we played school. That was my favorite thing to do, but it wasn't really play for me. I was very serious about it. I was
Mm-hmm.
teaching alphabet and numbers and all of that, but I had never heard
Wow.
of dyslexia. My daughter gave me the, I'll say, gift. It wasn't a gift for her, but
Mm-hmm.
the gift of knowing, and because of her issues, understanding and learning about dyslexia was a gift to me,
Yeah.
because I had no idea that dyslexia existed. So she was my introduction to finding out what was wrong and why she was unable to read,
Mm-hmm.
and suffered a lot for that. And then dyslexia was the reason why. And so that started the path on dyslexia
Got
for
you.
me.
Gotcha. And for my audience who might not be too familiar with dyslexia, can you describe it or explain it a little bit?
Sure, sure. Well, dyslexia is a language based processing disorder. A lot of people think that if you talk about dyslexia, that means that somehow the child or the adult um, has an intellectual issue. It has nothing to do with intellect. It has to do with how the brain processes language. And
Mm-hmm.
so it requires a structured, multisensory, explicit instruction, a code. People
Okay.
who have dyslexia need to be taught in a way that actually teaches the English code
Huh.
of how to read. People think that reading should come naturally, and a lot of the issues that we see today within the
Mm-hmm.
traditional public school setting and other settings is that the assumption was, with balanced literacy and whole language, was that children will naturally learn to read. We don't have to go into deep conversations about phonics or phonemic awareness. It'll just come naturally.
Mm-hmm.
We'll use three cueing, where you guess a
Mm-hmm.
lot, and versus being told and trained and taught how the English language works.
Yep.
And so it impacts up to 20% of the population. It's
Wow.
more prevalent in African American and Latino communities.
Hmm.
Not that dyslexia discriminates, it impacts all races. I believe that the reason why it impacts more diverse communities is due to access, understanding, and resources.
Mm. I
Mhm.
Yes, 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 yes. Because I feel like I know about dyslexia, and I have friends who've had dyslexia, so I'm kind of understanding their experience. But I haven't really worked with any students. My students, I'm in preschool teacher, so we don't quite see it too much in preschool just yet, but it's not something I've had too much experience and background into. So it's really interesting to kind of hear about like kind of the code that goes into it, especially teaching it. And I have been learning more about literacy, especially when it comes to early education, and how are we teaching literacy, and how are we fostering a love for learning and reading. with young students.
Yeah.
And I was very, shocked and surprised to see that, we haven't really had, within the United States, a formal kind of, this is how we teach reading. It's kind of either been state to state, it's been changing a lot. Now we have things like the science of reading coming. And so there's just all these different elements that are in there now. And so it was kind of shocking to know that, oh, we haven't had a consistent way that we've been teaching reading. And like you said, we've had the three queuing, we've had balance, we've had all these different like kind of options and ways. And so it makes me think about, how are we preparing teachers to teach reading if there's not a consistent way across the states that we're actually doing this? Lots of
You
questions
have
I had.
tapped Yes, you have tapped into everything that is happening nationwide and what has been labeled or deemed the reading wars. And
Right.
actually, if we taught all children, those who have the characteristics of dyslexia, those who are dyslexic, and those who just simply are beginning readers the same way,
Mm-hmm.
it works for everybody. And it's the proper way to do it. The structured literacy way
Mm-hmm.
also addresses the needs of those who are dyslexic. So if
Mm-hmm.
we just taught everyone how to read based on the science of reading, that would encapsulate every group that has issues and struggles with literacy. And so that's the goal.
Mm. I did my research on reading and literacy and just really trying to understand this. I got down this rabbit hole and I was like, wait a minute, there's
The long haul.
there's so much more than like meets the eye. This is
Hope.
like a formal iceberg of like, wait a minute. But yeah, that was kind of wild to me that there was a period of time where we weren't really teaching phonics, and we had gone to this kind of three queuing idea. Like, I don't know why we thought that was
Oh,
a
and
good
it's still
idea for
very,
reading.
yeah, and it's still very prevalent, unfortunately, in a
Mm,
lot of classrooms. There are over 50% of the classrooms in the nation are still using some model of three queuing balanced literacy, and it has been
mm,
proven and that it is not effective. It
mm,
is not the best way to teach reading. And because school systems bought into that particular program and
mhm.
Lucy Calkin, we have the dismal and abysmal literacy rates, not just for Black children, but for literacy altogether
Yeah.
across the United States. It's definitely time to change, and we have known for decades that this was not
Mhm.
it. Just beginning to catch fire, and hopefully it becomes a rapid fire, and that this is changed yesterday.
I
It's
mean,
needed
yeah,
to.
absolutely. Because we know like literacy in those early years is so incredibly important. And so, I have some problem with how we teach it in like the very early years, like kindergarten. I'm like, it still needs to be developmentally appropriate, and we still need to foster like an actual authentic love for learning and reading. We don't want to, kill their joy for reading early. And then also
No,
looking
no.
at our older students who their literacy rates, like if you're not acquiring it in that young early ages, right? The curriculum's going to keep going, and it doesn't have time in the curriculum at that point. Once you're in seventh grade and you're not at the seventh grade reading level, if you haven't been assessed for learning disorders, or if you haven't been assessed for dyslexia or ADHD or things that would compromise your ability to access reading, right? These kids tend to fall through the cracks, and then you're graduating high school and you're still functionally illiterate, and like that really limits your ability to have mobility in life. That really limits you in so many different ways. And it's I'm always saying that social justice, like literacy, is a social justice issue, because without literacy you're getting left behind, and you're not going to be aware of your rights. You're not going to be aware of what you are owed. You're not going to be aware of all these different things because it's connected to literacy. And so thinking about even our college students today, they're struggling with literacy, and it's just there's so many aspects to this.
You are singing my tune.
Mm-hmm.
You are on note. Everything that you just said, it impacts all of that. And
Yes,
also, I don't know if people know this, but illiteracy impacts your life expectancy.
really.
If you are illiterate, it impacts how well you live and how long you live. And
Mm,
that comes from research from going back to the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Reed Lyon, and many others. I don't
mm,
think that gets enough conversation, but it severely limits your life expectancy. as well, on top of everything else you just named.
Yeah, on top of all of those things, and then you look at, communities, and you're looking at, socioeconomic status. So these things, it has this kind of layering effect on it, right? So it's like, not only are you, being born in a, lower socioeconomic status, right? So you're in a community, you're, below the poverty line, right? And now you're functionally illiterate, and so that kind of limits your ability. And so it's just layering on top of layering on top of layering, and then you add in these other social justice issues in terms of, like, environmental social justice. You're looking at, the food insecurities. Like, we still have food deserts. We still have food
Yeah.
deserts, right? You look at, our environmental social justice, right? And, Flint, Michigan still does not have clean drinking water. And it's like there's just all these different compelling aspects that just keep layering it on layering it and layering it. So, like, I'm always talking about social justice because it is intertwined into the very fabric of our society and our everyday lives. Like, we can't not look at it, and we can't not address it, because it just kind of keeps perpetuating the cycle over and over and over again, when we have the skills and the tools and the advocacy to say, hey, let's think about this. Let's brainstorm some other ideas, friends. Let's get ourselves out of this.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. I wholeheartedly agree.
Yes, yes, yes. So, in terms with disparities to access to literacy support and resources, how do you think that we can address that particular issue when it comes to literacy and illiteracy?
Well, I think there are a number of things that can be done, but if we're talking about from the school aspect, we have to first have educators, teachers, the ground level, the grassroots level
Mm-hmm.
of the educational system has to have teachers who are trained in the science of reading, and who look like, if we're talking specifically for African American students, we need to have that. And on top of that, we need to have teachers that look like our students. There's such a disparity when it comes to educators within the classrooms. I mean, it is definitely a focus area that should be. I know a number of organizations are trying to address that, and I commend them. But we need to be recruiting from HBCUs. We need to be raising awareness about education when it comes to educators of color, and we also need to make sure that in the event, which is our narrative right now, that the majority of African American students are being taught by predominantly white teachers, that they have the cultural relevance, history, the understanding that their biases are challenged and checked,
Mm-hmm.
and that their lens on the narrative of Black boys as well as Black girls is accurate, and that we are ensuring that our children are in classrooms with people who truly are trained professionals, because teachers are trained professionals. All teachers
Mm-hmm.
should be treated as such, and to be
Yes.
treated as such, you need to be educated and armed with that type of information before you stand before any population, including the diverse
Mm-hmm.
classroom, to ensure that all of our children are getting access. And what's the word I want to use? The self-fulfilling prophecy, that the teacher and her lens is accurate, and
Yes.
so that all of our students can rise and be as successful as they choose to be.
Yes. So much of what you just said is just like gold. You've just rained gold, beautiful gem. Because it's so true, and we're seeing the research. I just talked to Dr. Constance Lindsay, and her research coming out about the importance of having Black educators in the classroom, and especially when it comes to special education and Black children either being overrepresented or underrepresented in special education. And so that's just such a big question. That
Yeah. What's her name again? I might need to look her up. What's her name?
Dr. Constance Lindsay, she's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, and her research, I can send you.
With you?
What's that?
Is she in California with you?
Is she in California? I think she might be in North Carolina. I think
Gotcha,
so.
gotcha.
I'll,
I
I'll
would
double
love for
check.
you
I'll
to
send
send
it.
me.
Yeah, I'll send you her
Yes,
information.
yes.
Her research is quite it kind of blew my mind on all the different things that she was researching. But we have researchers out there that are pointing to these things, and it's not saying that white educators are bad, that they're evil or anything like that. But there are
Not at all.
certain cultural nuances that Black educators understand when it comes to Black youth. That is really important, right? So
Mhm.
it's just looking at that, and it's just incredibly just, yes, important. Like, we should think about just having more Black educators in the classroom, but also making sure that they're very trained, and culturally competent, and just really leaning into some of these things so that we can make sure that the classroom is a safe space for all students, that all students feel safe and welcome and belonging, and they have a sense of ownership within their community, for all students, not just some students, right? And so that's the idea when we're
Yeah.
looking at inclusion. That's the direction that we're trying to move into when we're talking about these things. And
Yes,
you've
for sure.
mentioned the science of reading, and I know I've talked about it a little bit on this podcast before, and I think we talked a
Mhm.
little bit about it within the context of the podcast. But could you explain a little bit more about, like, what is the science of reading?
The science of reading is simply
Mm,
just a body of work scientifically that has been proven, and the evidence is there of how best to teach reading. There were reading panels that were conducted by the United States government. There were health panels that were put together with all types of researchers, just studying how the brain works, how do people um, learn to read, and
mm,
through those conversations, and again, this is not new information. It's just that these school systems are just beginning to start listening to it, but it's been around for yeah, decades and
mm,
decades. But panels and discussions were had, and they came up with, there's 5 essential components to reading that include phonemic awareness, phonics, comprehension, fluency, vocabulary,
mm,
and that these particular steps should be included in any training or any
mm,
teaching on literacy. And so it's been known, unfortunately, with Horace Mann and all of that, they decided that they would push whole language in the United States, and so whole
mm,
language kind of was adopted and has been the known reading guideline for our students, and we see the effects of that, and it's horrific. But it's
mm.
just simply saying, we don't have to guess at reading. We don't have
Yeah.
to say that one particular group of children they just know how to read, and there's just some that just fall through the cracks, and
Mm,
it's not our issue. It's a parental issue. It's a children's effort issue. No,
mm,
these kids really, really need an understanding of how the English code is and is written. And
mm,
so it's not a guessing thing. We can explain to children if we arm our teachers,
mm,
who are the professionals, because they're coming out of colleges of
mm.
education. They had not had any formal training on reading.
No.
In Nebraska before 2019, where we started passing legislation that demands that you teach every teacher coming out of the College of Education about dyslexia and what it looks
Mm.
like. What are the characteristics? How do you address it? And that didn't happen until 2019. Me and you started this
Wow.
podcast talking about my daughter. That was in the year 2000. It's 2024. So technically,
Wow.
had I not looked outside of the traditional classroom back in 2000, 2001, 2002, um, my daughter would have made it through her entire academic life without being able to read, because it didn't even come
Mm.
into existence. And again, we're still just beginning. And so
Yeah.
uh, that that's the issue. The issue is, how do we, and should we? And the answer,
Mhm.
of course, is absolutely. Should we be alarmed, and should we be demanding and assisting and providing different avenues to help children learn to read,
Mhm.
just children in general, until these school systems, which kind of move rather slow on change. But
Yeah.
we can't allow our kids to sit there illiterate while this long journey to change happens when it comes to structured literacy.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And That is quite shocking that legislation didn't come into effect until like 2019, because you know it's something that as educators we do need to be aware of, and knowing the best ways, especially if we do have students in the general population that might have dyslexia, might be diagnosed, might be undiagnosed, right? The best ways that we can then support these students in our classroom, right? And so making sure that we're providing opportunities for them to have assignments and to do the readings and all those things that in a way that works best for them, so that all students again are getting access to high quality education and instruction that they deserve. Like, they deserve to be a part of that, and they deserve to get that learning. And so I love that there's
Yeah.
legislation now about it. It is shocking that it took that long, but
And,
like.
and legislation is just, you think, and I've learned that dealing with policy and advocating
Mhm,
and speaking at hearings, not
mhm,
just in Nebraska, but across the United States on education, on educational freedom, all
mhm,
of those components. And one of the things that I stress is our teachers, those who get into the profession of teaching, they get into the profession of teaching, not that they're trying to get rich, because obviously
mhm,
that won't happen as an educator, which I feel like, we definitely need to address that disparity, teacher
mhm,
pay disparity versus other professional organizations or roles. Doctors go to school, they go through a formal training, and they come out and they're at a much greater level of economic
mhm.
fairness. And then teachers, of course, are not. And so I think
Yeah.
that that's an issue that needs to be addressed. I also feel like a lot of teachers get the raw end of the deal when it comes
Mhm,
to how they are looked at, and when their classrooms have 70, 80, 90% of the students in that classroom who can't read. Is it the
mhm.
teacher's fault? And let's really have a conversation
Yeah,
about
it
that.
is.
And we can't blame a teacher who, for all intents and purposes, went into teaching because they want to make a difference in the lives of children.
Mhm.
They want to shape the next generation when they have not been armed with the proper training out the gate. They can't
Yes.
give you what they've been trained to have. And so we have a lot of teachers. I know when I was in the educational system, and that was my day to day,
Mhm,
you don't the it doesn't turn off once the bell rings. You go home with that
mhm.
every night. Think
Yep.
about those kids in your classroom who are struggling, and
Mhm.
what you've tried, and why isn't it clicking. And
Yeah.
so I know that a lot of parents have, I mean, a lot of teachers have went home with those burdens, and
Yep.
it haunts them to this day. Those that
Yep.
are learning about structured literacy now, you reflect back to this child or that child that
Mhm.
you were trying to teach reading, and how it just didn't work, and you feel a sense of blame because you
Yeah.
didn't have that information. And so I just want to tell teachers out there that may have that narrative now that, you can't be held accountable for what you didn't know. And yes, there were kids who fell through the cracks. And
Yep.
unfortunately, that is something that the educational system as a whole, and the colleges of education, the halls wherewith teachers went through to get their certification. That's
Mhm.
that's a responsibility and accountability that they need to own.
Yes. I absolutely could not agree more. Like, we can't just put the blame on teachers because they can't teach what they don't know. They're teaching what curriculum they're given. They're teaching, what they learned about in their certificate programs, right? And so, it's unfair to fully place the blame on teachers when, again, in the United States, we haven't had a consistent way that we have designated that this is how we're teaching reading. And so that's been kind of, we failed from the beginning in that sense. And it does go into those teacher preparation programs of what are we actually teaching our teachers? How are we actually getting them prepared? I know when I was going through, my classes and everything to teach, and I I feel like I learned a lot. There's a lot of theory that I learned in college, and I'm a big theory nerd. I love theory. um, and so I loved all the background. So the more that I learned about children and how they develop and how they learn, I feel like the better teacher I became. But it wasn't
Yeah.
until I actually got into the classroom when a lot of that practical knowledge came to me. I learned a lot through just being in the classroom. Um, and so like that is one way to do it, but when it comes to literacy, and it's not one of those things that our brains are naturally geared towards learning. It's we're very geared towards like verbal language. We love verbal language, visual language. Like we love visuals, we love verbal language. But when it comes to doing something like reading, that's not necessarily how our brains are, wired to do. So it's you really have to do it very, structured, and you do have to, be very specific with how you're doing it. Very, very few children will learn without, super specific instruction. Most children need very specific instruction when it comes to literacy and reading. And of course,
That's it.
again, we need to do that in ways that are developmentally appropriate, looking at our students, right? So, here in California, we are, we've just, going into transitional kindergarten. So all 4-year-olds have transitional kindergarten now, and we're looking at all 3-year-olds. And so, part of my concern with that is, we've already seen this kind of push down in K through 12 education with, you know, kindergarten basically becoming first grade. And so the concern is like, is TK going to essentially just become kindergarten? And so thinking about, yes, we want to make sure that we have good practices when it comes to teaching children to read, but also just as important, we want to make sure we're doing it in a way that is developmentally appropriate for the children that you have in that classroom right there, right? So we can't expect them to do things that are outside of their developmental norm. Like we can't expect them to sit down for long stretches of time at that age range because they're not built to
Don't
do
take
that.
play, and don't take play out of
Don't take
out
play
of
out of
the
it.
narrative.
Yeah.
It's so wicked. Look at us. We're adults.
Yeah.
We understand. Look, we need downtime. We need outlets,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
they get a one childhood, and so we want to ensure that all like you said, reading is absolutely important, and
Yes.
reading can be fun, and teaching reading
Yes.
can be fun. But we
Yes.
also need to understand that children need an outlet. They need time
Mm-hmm.
for play, expression, all of those different things, and so let's have all of that, not just some of that.
Exactly. Exactly. I 100% agree. I think if we would have taught me math at a young age that was fun and play based, I'm pretty sure I would like math more now. So,
You and I both. Now my thing. I do it every day, and I'm grateful that I
yes.
know the
Yep.
basics, but not my strongest subject
Not my
in
strongest
school.
subject. Absolutely not.
To be honest, it wasn't. But I
No.
know how to count money.
There you go.
Mm.
Put it in money terms. I'm like,
And
okay, let's go.
yeah,
Hmm.
but financial literacy is huge and
Yes.
it's important.
Yeah.
We definitely need to
Yeah.
we need that in the classroom as well.
Yes. I feel like there's
How do
so many versions of literacy too, right? You have, literacy, you have financial literacy, and then we have to go into like digital literacy, like
we,
especially
yeah,
teaching, children these 21st century skills. This is also
absolutely.
something that's incredibly important. So media literacy, digital, like there's just so many like offshoots of it that are
Oh my
just so
goodness.
important. And like I can have a whole podcast just based on those different forms of literacy in themselves.
Branch
Um,
after branch after
yep,
branch.
yep. It's a big old tree. So,
It is. It is.
um,
It is.
but on that subject, how do you reimagine education?
How do I reimagine education? So I think that we put no limit on what education can look like, how
Mm,
uh, we can teach in traditional classrooms or non-traditional classroom. What does that look like? And I think that it all comes back to, you know, all children learn differently, and parents are a child's best advocate. And so when we work in tandem with parents and schools, and we have the educational freedom, I'm a huge supporter of educational freedom,
mm,
meaning that, I don't have a fight per se with one version of school and what that looks like, but
mhm,
I understand under the Declaration of Human Rights, one of the articles talks about that parents should have the right to choose the best educational setting for their children, and that it should be free and
mhm,
appropriate, at least through the elementary years. And so we have had a huge debate going on in respects to school choice and African Americans' perspective on that and all of that. And here's my spiel with that. My
mhm,
thing is this. I like I said, I came from a family of educators, traditional public school
mhm.
educators. My son thrived in the traditional public school, but my daughter did not.
Yes.
And we just talked about that on here, is that we didn't, in the state of Nebraska, didn't get legislation that had any meat to it until 2019. My daughter was in school
Um,
in the 1999, 2000. And so there weren't any there wasn't any real training or knowledge to help her in the traditional public school. And as I said, I only made $800 a month. I
mm,
couldn't afford out of my own pocket to pay for a private school for her,
yeah.
but that is what she truly needed. And I don't know any parent on this planet who sees their child struggling educationally. My
Mm-hmm.
daughter used to hit herself in the head and say, I'm stupid, I'm stupid, I'm stupid,
Oh,
and there's something wrong with me. And then her behaviors began to escalate. And
yeah.
so then the focus shifted from why she couldn't read to she's a behavior problem. We need to address that. She needs a behavior intervention plan.
Mm,
So she was headed toward that pipeline, that school to prison pipeline. And as a
yeah.
parent, I was like, absolutely not. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, educational freedom is a part of how I see education.
Mm-hmm.
That in the event, or even if it doesn't get to that particular problem, parents should have the right to choose the best educational system for their children. I think
Yes.
that the funds should follow the students, fund students and not systems. I think that if you offer a very uh, great program or a good program, whether that's traditional public, whether that's private, whether that's homeschool, whether that's virtual, whatever the setting is, if
Mm-hmm.
it helps your child, and if your child gets the free, appropriate public education that they want and that they need, then that's what we should be offering these students.
Yes.
That's my spiel. So
Yes.
I think that micro schools are on the rise, where you get the
Mm-hmm.
low classrooms, about eight or less, five or less
Yep.
kids. I think there's such powerful things happening. I'm a part of the Arizona State University Micro School Fellowship, and I just
Yes.
attended the Arizona State University and Global Silicon Valley Summit that was April 17th, and that was huge. And there's
Wow.
so much innovation that's happening. We're in an age with artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Just education is open. I think some of it is just taking us back to what we originally had, the freedom schools, where we
Mm-hmm.
had all of these different things through our ancestors and the NAACP and its formation. The sky is the limit. I think when we
Yeah.
start to try to define and create barriers to education, that's when we have a problem.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And I loved that fund students, not systems, and break, yes, all.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? What's really this is some of the conversation that I've had with people who
Hmm.
argue against that. Well, public dollars should be to fund public schools, and that narrative exists from K to 12. And then,
Hmm.
ironically, once we hit high school, 12th grade, then we go to
Yeah.
college and we start applying for Pell Grants.
Hmm.
Then that argument automatically leaves. Like,
Yeah.
why? It makes no sense to me. We can
Yeah.
use public federal dollars
Hmm.
at the collegiate level, pre
Hmm.
bachelor's undergrad, but that narrative is the devil and the antagonist to public
Hmm.
school. And I just think it's a very weak argument.
I 100% agree with you on that. I've been saying the same thing in early childhood education. We have, private
That too,
early
Head
child,
Start.
Head Start,
Yeah,
state
all that.
funded. So it's like it's out
Exactly.
there. You can go to a
Yeah.
family child care home and all of that, and it's like, okay, but and then you go to K to 12 and they're like, no, we can't do that here. It's like, but we just
It's all about power. And, unfortunately, unions are, they have their reasonings. I don't think that it's in the best interest of students, but yeah. But yeah, I think that that's the reason why that it happens. It's about power, and it's about, keeping the dollars within that particular set of power influence. And unfortunately, that's not always in the best interest of students. Students and the parents who raise them, are quite capable of saying, hey, this system works and this one doesn't. And I think that a lot of times parents get um, this kickback from the public school setting, K through 12, saying, you don't know what's best for your kids, we do. And so you can't tell us what's the best educational system for them. We're the professionals. And yes, we absolutely can. You know,
Yep.
we know what's best for our kids, just like we are the ones that are capable of figuring out which doctor we go to or which dentist we go to for our children. We can do all those things, you know, what they eat, what we did, what we want, where we want to live, all of those choices we make as parents. We can definitely make the choice of what's in the best interest of our children. That's
Absolutely.
I can go
Absolutely.
on and on about that, as you can tell.
I mean, I will listen to that all day. Everything you just said, spot on. Give children what they need, give them the supports they need, empower parents to have a choice in their students' education. Parents, they're going to know their child, they're going to know what their child needs, and allow them to have a choice, and that allow their voice to be heard. Voice and choice, especially, it's a big social justice conversation that we're constantly having with parents is, who has voice and choice. If you have the money, then yeah, of course you have so many options, you can
Right.
do whatever you want, right?
Absolutely.
you
And
know
if you don't, your
then
children are just supposed to just sit there and trust a system
yep.
that took 30 years to do what
Hmm.
I was asking in
Yep.
respects to my daughter.
Hmm.
No, no, not going to sit here
Nope.
for 30 years and allow my daughter to become a grown adult who can't read, write, or spell. That is
Exactly.
not happening.
Nope. And I'm so glad that she had an advocate in you and that you were, there to be a part of her journey. It sounds like it just really was a beautiful partnership between you two. And thank you so much for just sharing your story and sharing more about just the work that you do. I personally am very excited to see what's coming up and all the different projects and things you'll be working on. But if my audience is curious and would also like to follow the work that you're working on, where can they find you?
They can find me at blackliteracymatters.org. You could find us on social media at facebook.com, blackliteracymatters.org. I mean, Black Literacy Matters. My tutoring center, which works with all children, not just particularly Black children, is called Voice Advocacy Center. And we are the first of its kind dyslexia screening and literacy center in the state of Nebraska. And so we provide tutoring, which is actually just teaching the science of reading to students who have severely struggled with not being identified as dyslexic and
Mm,
or just have not received the science of reading instruction that they needed within the traditional public schools. So that's voiceadvocacycenter.org. You can find me on LinkedIn under Clarice Jackson. I
beautiful.
reside in Omaha, Nebraska, just in case there's another Clarice Jackson out there. Jackson is a common name. I don't know how common Clarice is. I've met or have seen several people with the name Clarice, not many. So that's
Yeah,
how you can find.
beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Clarice. This has been a beautiful conversation. You're just such a ray of light, and I just love your information that you share and just your wealth of knowledge and your background and experience. It just was such a warming conversation. So I want to thank you again so much for joining me and sharing all this beautiful information. And I'll link everything in our show notes. So if our audience is curious where to find you and they want to look at what you're doing, it'll all be linked there below. And again, thank you so much, and just thank you for joining me.
Thank you. You are just a breath of fresh air too. So I hope that we'll continue getting to know each other. I know you're going to do great things in the world. You're
Thank
making your
you.
grandmother proud, your family proud, and follow your heart, follow your
Mm.
spirit. If your spirit tells you to do it, you do it, and know that you can do whatever you set your mind to do. And so I anticipate watching you down the road coming up with something great that impacts our nation and our children.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We'll be talking.
We will. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into Conscious Pathways. Please like, follow, and subscribe Conscious Pathways wherever you get your podcasts. We are on most major podcasting platforms. So on Spotify, you can click the follow button and you'll be alerted to every time I release a new episode. On Apple Podcasts, you can also hit the follow or the plus sign and follow me there. I'm also on YouTube, so I post the video versions of all of our videos on YouTube so you can see me and our guests talking directly on YouTube. So you can subscribe there if you like video podcasts. Also, don't forget to leave a rating or review. I love hearing feedback from you all. I love hearing your thoughts on episodes, and leave a 5-star review. It does really help the podcast to grow and find more listeners just like you. And if you're looking for more ways to engage with Conscious Pathways, you can find me on Instagram at conscious.pathways. You can find my Patreon. I've also linked that in the show notes. If you join my Patreon for as little as $5 a month, you can get access to behind the scenes, my monthly newsletter. You can also have access to asking the experts. You can ask me a question that I can answer directly on the podcast, or you can ask a guest a question that they can answer directly on the podcast. So it's a really great way to learn more about what we're working on behind the scenes and to really get engaged with podcasts as well. And until next time, don't forget to navigate your conscious journey with kindness and courage. And I'll see you there for more transformative conversations in education. Bye!